Hey guys, welcome to Youth Online. It's a new year and with it come new goals that we want to achieve. And the goals we set, not just in the new year, but for our lives, are important and they have an impact. So we're going to talk about how to set and achieve our goals. But before we get into it, I want you to write down a goal. It could be about what you want to accomplish, what you want to become, or what difference you want to make in the world. Write down whatever you're thinking. You can pause this video to take a moment to do that now. Through this series, we hope to help you answer questions like, what goals should I have for my life? What do my goals have to do with God's goals? And how can I achieve my goals? To do that, we're going to look at Nehemiah and the big goal that he had and what we can learn from his story. We find his story in the book of Nehemiah. But first, a little background. About 140 years before this book begins, the Jewish people were conquered by an enemy army that took control of Jerusalem. They destroyed the city, burnt the temple where the Jewish people worshipped God, and they sent many of God's people into exile. Through the prophets, God promised that He would restore and rebuild Jerusalem, and that God's people would return. But this was a devastating loss for the Jewish people. So long after Jerusalem had been destroyed and a new king took control, some of God's people began to return to Jerusalem, looking for ways to rebuild what they had lost, but it was going to be a long process. So when we meet Nehemiah in chapter 1, he is still in exile. And he's just learned that the Jewish people are beginning to return to Jerusalem. But he's also told that the gates and the walls of the city are in ruin. When he heard this, it broke his heart, so he began to pray. Now Nehemiah's job was as a cupbearer to the king. And when he entered the king's presence after praying, he was sad. And so the king asked him what was wrong. And so we read in chapter 2, verse 3 to 5, "But I said to the king, may the king live forever. Why should my face not look sad when the city where my ancestors are buried lies in ruins, and its gates have been destroyed by fire?" The king said to me, "What is it you want?" Then I prayed to the God of heaven, and I answered the king, "If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in his sight, let him send me to the city in Judah where my ancestors are buried, so that I can rebuild it." So the news of the condition of Jerusalem's broken walls ignited a desire in Nehemiah to rebuild them. Nehemiah had a big goal inspired by a big problem. He already knew that Jerusalem had been destroyed. That was old news. But when he heard that the Jewish people were beginning to return to Jerusalem and that the walls were still destroyed, Nehemiah saw a problem. In fact, he saw two. The first one is a practical problem. Without the walls, the Jewish people would be vulnerable to another attack. And the second problem is a spiritual one. The city of Jerusalem was deeply connected with the Jewish people's relationship with God. So rebuilding the walls would be a way that they could honor the Lord. So he set a God-sized goal. Find a way to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem so that God's people would be protected and that they could honor God. Now, as we're looking at the story, we can see that Nehemiah's goal began with three things. And these things can help us in setting our goals too. First of all, his goal began with difficulty. Nehemiah didn't set this goal because he needed some new cool New Year's resolution, but he set it because he saw a problem. It was a problem that needed to be solved, and he believed that he could help solve it. When he became aware of this problem, he was saddened by it. Verse 4 says that he wept. So solving this problem wasn't just a fun hobby. It was something that mattered deeply to him. And secondly, his goal began with prayer. As Nehemiah wept, he prayed. He knew that he couldn't solve this problem by himself. So before he made a single move, he asked God for wisdom, for guidance, and for help. And then he kept praying for months afterwards. And thirdly, his goal began with God's help. Nehemiah stood up from his prayer, determined to attempt a series of impossible tasks. And he knew that his wisdom and experience wasn't enough to guarantee success. So he asked God for help. The size of this goal forced Nehemiah to put all of his faith in a God who could do what Nehemiah couldn't. Now the book of Nehemiah starts with destruction, loss, grief, and tears, but that's not where the story is going to end. But when Nehemiah heard the news of Jerusalem's destroyed walls, he discovered an important truth, and this is what we can learn from the beginning of his story, is that big difficulties can inspire God-sized goals. Now remember that goal I asked you to write down in the beginning? I want you to take a look at it again. How does your goal compare to Nehemiah's? Is your goal inspired by difficulty? Is your goal driven by prayer? And do you need God's help to accomplish your goal? See, it's not hard to set goals that benefit us. Most of us do that every new year. But those kinds of goals are kind of like running on a treadmill. On a treadmill, you can run for a really long time, you can run long distances, and you can burn lots of calories. But you're not going anywhere. See, no matter how fast you run, you're not going to move from the place you started. And when we set us-sized goals, it's kind of like running on a treadmill. We're the only ones who really benefit. Now, there's nothing wrong with setting us-sized goals, but let's learn from Nehemiah and set God-sized goals that can change the world around us. Remember, big difficulties can inspire God-sized goals. Now, perhaps your goal is hidden within something you're passionate about or a cause that you're passionate about. But I encourage you to ask God to open your eyes to the needs around you and set a goal that doesn't just benefit you, but that will make a difference in the lives of the people around you. So like Nehemiah, may you be inspired to make a difference by the difficulties you see around you. Be driven by prayer and rely on God's help to accomplish your God-sized goals.